President Trump are in a tight race for Georgia's vote, with Trump holding a 1-point lead in the latest polling, well within the margin of error.
Georgia has one of the highest maternal mortality rates of any state, according to the Center for Reproductive Rights. And nationally, Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications than white women.
NBC's Tremaine Lee sat down with a rarely heard from group of voters in Atlanta, Black men voting for the lives of Black women. And Tremaine joins us now. Tremaine, good morning. What did these men tell you?
Jose, maternal mortality and reproductive justice are typically issues we consider for as men's issues, Black men's issues in particular. But I sat down with a group of Black men, among them 2 who lost their wives during childbirth due to complications, who are urging other Black men to get off the sidelines and vote as if the women in their lives, their mothers, sisters, daughters, and partners' lives are at stake.
For me, it's very simple, right? As someone that's been, drastically impacted and devastated through the loss of my wife, through maternal mortality, it's very clear Vice President Harris is the one that ideally aligns with, the person that I feel like would have the most compassion and empathy towards my family and everything I've experienced.
I'm thinking about my daughter, my friends, my cousins that this affects. Just thinking about the abortion laws that they want to put into place. It's kind of like if you have embryos, are they considered, viable or living, and can you discard them, or what do you have to do? You have to constantly pay for them being frozen. So it's just, I think the Harris administration will align more with my views.
The election is just days away. What role did maternal health play in your decision?
Oh, it played a major role. It was, I already knew I was voting for Harris, but it made it almost poetic that the person that she is running against, has done everything to try and whip up his conservative base. And one of the ways that he has done that is through these draconian abortion laws that he has supported.
I think that bottom line, Vice President Harris' track record around maternal health and specifically naming Black maternal health as a priority for this administration is unquestionable. I think in 2021, there were less than 10 states that had expanded postpartum care for mothers to a year postpartum. Now we have, I think, 46 as of January of this year. That's true change. And so you can't question it. With that being said, I have yet to hear anything from the Trump administration or his policy when it comes to making an impact on the maternal health crisis, and particularly the Black maternal health crisis. I wonder for each of you, what is at stake?
My wife's life. She's pregnant right now. Republicans here in Georgia have been more concerned about whether or not my wife goes and gets an abortion, or if a miscarriage that we've had could potentially have been done in a way that was insidious, than they have been about protecting my wife who wants to be a mom. Mm-hmm. There are many Black women who want to be mothers.
I never missed a prenatal visit for either of my sons. My wife never missed a prenatal vitamin, right? I went to the Lamaze classes. I held her hand, right? I looked the doctors in the eyes. I let them know that she had a husband that was here and was willing to die for her. And none of that was enough. None of that was enough to make sure that my wife walked out of that hospital to raise her sons. And so for me, although there's nothing I can do to bring Kira back, the highest honor we can pay her, the highest honor we can pay Yolanda, the highest honor that we can pay every single mother that's made the ultimate sacrifice, giving the gift of life, is to make sure we do everything we can, which includes electing people that prioritize maternal health and aren't ashamed to say Black maternal health.
Jose, this group of men have coalesced around an organization called Sister Song here in Atlanta. It's a reproductive justice organization. And their message is dovetailing the closing argument from VP Kamala Harris and high-level surrogates like Michelle Obama that Black men should vote. Men should vote in honor of their women in their lives. And they should protect, especially Black men, protecting Black women, Jose.
Tremaine Lee, what a powerful and in so many ways important conversation. I thank you.
And joining us now, W. Kamau Bell, TV host and author of Do the Work, an Anti-Racist Activity book. And still with us, Simone Sanders Townsend. Kamau, so nice to see you again, my friend. What's your reaction to what we heard from these men about the role that women's health is playing in their vote?
Well, since my hair is all gray, I've officially entered my unk era, so I'm proud of those brothers. I'm proud of them, and if I was Kamala Harris, I would take them on the road with me, because I think a lot of times the talk around black men voting is that it feels like it's responsibility politics or shaming, and those brothers are speaking from their heart, and that is way more powerful than anything even Barack Obama could say or Kamala Harris could say, because they are real men speaking from their heart. So I feel very charged up and proud of them.
Yeah, I mean, Simone, this is something that we rarely hear, and it's not anyone's fault, I guess, but that Tremaine was able to sit down and it seemed like such a private conversation, right? And yet with such massive significance. What does something like this, how much of an impact will something like this conversation have on the national discourse?
Yeah, I think it's a huge impact, right? I think that when we talk about the impact of the Dobbs decision, how Democrats writ large nationally have talked about it since the Dobbs decision has been the focus on just women. And I feel like now we're talking more nationally about the gender gap and how men are a part of this conversation. But when you drill down into communities, men have always been a part of this conversation. Those men that were in this focus group with Tremaine in Georgia, they are the physical not even just a physical representation. They lived the harrowing stories that Mrs. Obama talked about in her remarks in Kalamazoo with the vice president just last week. And this is real for voters all across the country. It's why I fundamentally believe that actually the impact of Dobbs, we actually are not seeing it reflected in the data, because this is the first presidential post-Dobbs. It's not a theoretical conversation for these men in Georgia or men in Texas or men in Arizona, men in South Carolina, men in North Carolina. This is real. Women are bleeding out. Women are dying from sepsis. Men are coming home from the hospital without their families. And I feel like when we put it in such real terms, then it becomes more of an accessible conversation for folks. I'm really grateful for Tremaine for bringing the conversation to the forefront.
Kamau, I'm curious how you are looking at like the closing arguments we're seeing from both candidates, frankly, especially as they are courting some of these key constituencies, these voters of color, Black voters, Latino voters. Are their messages landing with the voters who need to hear them?
I mean, Tuesday will tell. I don't think everybody is looking at this from a million different angles. We are not sitting around watching the same news channels anymore. We have Joe Rogan, who somehow thinks he's Walter Cronkite, which is weird. So I think we have to understand that everybody's looking at this differently. We have a huge percentage of the country who, no matter what Donald Trump does or says, they are voting for him. That is their guy. And then we have people on the left who are often voting for reasons that are individual and very powerful to them. And so I think you have to wait until you get in that voting booth to decide. I'm telling everybody act like it's going to be close and act like your vote makes the difference.
Simone, on yesterday, J.D. Vance went on Joe Rogan's past podcast and was asked about abortion. Here's part of what he had to say.
I get it if y'all think the states have been neglecting you, but with this new program, they're actually
what he had to say.
This is not true of the gross majority of our pro-choice citizens, but you do sometimes see people they'll go on TikTok and they'll celebrate having an abortion.
Yeah.
I've known many, many women, usually when I was younger, who chose to have abortions because they felt like they didn't have any other options. And, I don't judge them. I think that a lot of them just felt like they were completely trapped, and they made the decision that was ultimately right for them. Again, my argument is we need to try to gain those women's trust back, because clearly the Republican Party on this issue has lost a lot of trust, but none of them were baking birthday cakes and posting about it afterwards.
Simone, just what's your reaction to that?
Well, you know what? Joe Rogan did push back. So right. I'm glad for Joe Rogan.
People aren't celebrating.
Yeah,
that's a little extreme.
It's very extreme. Look, I think the problem is that J.D. Vance talks about earning women's trust back, and that the Republican Party apparatus has to do that, and Republican elected officials. The issue with the ability to earn women's trust back is, no, Republicans did not run on jailing women, jailing doctors, fining women, fining doctors, women, making women bleed out in parking lots, right? Making 10-year-olds have the babies of their rapists. But that is exactly what is happening in many places across this country. Literally, every state in the South except for Virginia. If you go into a hospital and you're pregnant and something, you have an emergency, they are first going to say, I can't do anything for you because you are pregnant. Like, they're going to say, I need to call the lawyer, not let me give you the healthcare that you need. And so, again, it's not a theoretical conversation anymore. So J.D. Vance, the Republican Party apparatus, hasn't done anything about the realities that women are dealing with in this country and across the country. They haven't. And the unresponsiveness to the reality of the situation, I think, is the consequence that people will meet at the ballot box. More than 3.5 million people have already voted in Georgia. More than 873,000 Black voters specifically, like those Black men in Georgia that Tremaine Lee talked to. These are record numbers, and it's going to make a difference.
Kamal, your thoughts on what we heard from Vance?
First of all, I've been trying to avoid JD Vance content, so now I got a migraine. Thanks for that, MSNBC. I would say this: Joe Rogan isn't sure we landed on the moon, and yet felt like he had to push back against JD Vance. That tells you a lot about where JD Vance and his political policies lie. That even the guy who's always high on weed, who's not sure we landed on the moon, was like, wait a minute, JD Vance, I think you're talking crazy.